You know, I'm an eighth blood, and by federal law in a variety of ways, recognition of Indians oftentimes stops at quarter blood. And it's been a huge irritation to me for my whole life. In fact, there's a Gary Bass story in here, too, on the same issue. That only amongst Indians is blood quantum an issue when identifying yourself by whatever ethnic background you want to do. I'm not a quarter blood German. I'm not an eighth blood Norwegian. I'm not a whatever. You know, you are or you aren't. And most often it's whether or not you've got the name Svensson that tells you that you're Swedish. I love, we've got a big black guy in my office whose name is Keith Bruce. It almost sounds Scottish. And but anyway, it's been a real irritant for me. And in fact, we had a meeting probably 2 months after that first meeting, and I'm pretty sure it's after the first invasion, at Tlingit, and there's probably 100 to 150 people in there. And somebody starts talking about blood quantum as to whether they should even be in there. Now, my wife was with me at the time. She's not a native at all. But in some respects, at the time, was more pushy than I was on some of the issues. And somebody gets up and just starts ranting about, we don't want any of these white guys in here. So eventually I stand up and I said, okay, let's try and define who's an Indian and who's not. And I'm an eighth blood. Am I an Indian? And now there was a guy named Jim Halliday. And Jim was married to Jeannie Halliday, and she was probably Puyallup or Muckleshoot, Washington tribe anyway. And she and her family were very much involved in the creation of the Seattle Indian Center. And Jim was one of the first totally white guys that I'm aware of that was invited to drum in the circle with the Yakima. I mean, that's a big deal when you get invited into that circle. And so I used his name. There isn't anybody in this room that has done more or been more Indian than Jim Halliday. But he has no Indian blood. Is he entitled to stay in here? Oh, I really got pissed. And because to a certain extent, this guy that had been, and he was one of the guys out of Alcatraz, by the way, that he was definitely staring at my wife as to why she was there. And in fact, to a certain extent, my wife's passion for the whole thing took a big hit that night. But it is an issue that I've been fighting all my life. You know, even my dad, who truly looks more like Jimmy Stewart than he looks like any Indian. He had that issue. It has caused more division than anything I can think of. And to show how bad that blood quantum thing can get, 1973-74, there's an effort to create a National Indian Lawyers Association. And a meeting was called, and anybody that had any kind of legal background with Indian blood or Indian practice was invited. And we met down in Boulder. And there were about 7 guys from the Seattle area, including Gary Bass, myself, and my dad. And it's a 3-day meeting. And I tell you, the first day and a half is just really exciting as to what this could all lead to. And we get to close to the end of the second day, and all of a sudden now the discussion starts on who can be a member of this bar association. Well, anybody that's done anything in Indian law has got to recognize that the Washington, D.C. Jewish bar has probably, up until that period of time, had more Indian clients and been more involved in Indian law questions than any other group you could imagine. Particularly true in Alaska. There was a guy named Weisbrot. And now, I don't know whether Weisbrot wants to be a member of this association or not. But we're not going to let him come here who's got more stories about more Indian legal battles than anybody you can think of, and we're going to deny ourselves access to this guy. And of course, there were a bunch of other white guys there that had no Indian blood, but they had some significant part of their practice was Indian law. And now Gary Bass, as it turns out, is 15/64. I mean, he's got a complicated kind of... Now, he's born and raised on the reservation. He's the first Colville to get a full-ride scholarship for his college degree, and he also got significant help for his law degree from the tribe. I mean, the guy is a Colville Indian at every corner of his being. So anyway, we're sitting at dinner, and he's a 64th short of blood quantum of a quarter, and finally he looks over to me and he said, and this is a very quiet, educated, almost British in his decorum. He looks at me and says, Blair, I am out of here right now, because I know if I stay here another 15 minutes, I'm going to hit somebody. God, he was mad. And so we ended up hitchhiking from Boulder to Denver and flying back to Seattle that night. And the thing never got off the ground. Never got off the ground. There is such an animal out there now, but created 15 years later. All on completely unacceptable race definition, I guess. I don't know.